Imagine this. At your younger brother's wedding, your parents and brother kicked your grandmother out because she didn't look fancy enough for the event. What would you do? That's precisely what I went through 2 years ago. But that day, I didn't stay silent. I stood up for her. Still, what truly hit my family the hardest was what she did afterward with a $200,000 check. So what did my grandmother do with that check? Stay with me. Let me tell you the whole story. Hello, everyone. My name's Olivia. I'm 32 years old right now. I live with my husband, Robert, our 8-year-old daughter, Mia, and my grandmother, Sandra, who's 78. We share a 4-bedroom home in Austin, Texas. 2 years ago, our lives looked completely different. Back then, my family wasn't living with Grandma. Robert, Mia, and I rented a cramped apartment for $200 monthly. It had 2 bedrooms, a living room that doubled as the kitchen, and one tiny bathroom we all had to share. The house we live in now, a spacious home with a yard and room for all of us to breathe, was a gift from Grandma Sandra. To show our gratitude, Robert and I convinced her to move in with us so we could take care of her in her later years. Life now is just the 4 of us taking care of each other. Me, Robert, Mia, and Grandma Sandra. Every morning, I wake up feeling thankful for the warmth and closeness of this little family we've built. We used to be part of a bigger family. My dad, Mark, my mom, Brenda, and my younger brother, Lucas. They were people I once loved deeply and was proud to call my own. But everything changed 2 years ago at Lucas's wedding. That day, something happened, something none of us saw coming. A family tragedy unfolded most unexpectedly, and we cut ties with them from that moment on. The warm phone calls and joyful family dinners became nothing more than memories. Sometimes I can't help but wish my parents hadn't betrayed Grandma the way they did so cruelly. Maybe then our family wouldn't have fallen apart like it did, in a way none of us could have imagined. The tragedy in our family began at my younger brother Lucas's wedding. I remember it clearly. 1 week before the wedding, we had a family dinner arranged at Mom's request. It took place at our favorite Italian restaurant, the one we always visited for special occasions. During the meal, right after we finished ordering, Mom spoke up formally and asked Robert and me to help her. Dad and Lucas welcomed a few crucial guests, relatives flying in from California and Oregon for the wedding. These guests included some of Lucas's business partners, a few well-known lawyers, and several wealthy families from the city. Mom carefully assigned us specific guests to look after. She handed us a detailed list with their names, preferences, and how to address each person appropriately. I honestly admired how thorough and thoughtful she was in preparing all this. Since it was my brother's big day, we were happy to help. Robert smiled and agreed to take care of the lawyers' wives, while I would handle the male business guests. But as I scanned through the long list of names, something felt off. I didn't see Grandma Sandra's name anywhere. 2 full pages of names, and yet the woman who had raised my dad wasn't on it. Maybe they'd forgotten to write her name down, or perhaps they'd add it later. So I turned to Lucas sitting beside me and casually asked, "You're not inviting Grandma?" As soon as I said that, Lucas paused mid-cut, his fork and knife hovering over his steak. He was quiet for a few seconds, avoiding my eyes, then finally answered, almost struggling with the words, "I'm not inviting Grandma to the wedding." Right after Lucas spoke, Mom jumped in with a firm expression and said, "That's right. Lucas's guests are all successful and refined people. Grandma doesn't fit in with this kind of event." Hearing them say that made something inside me turn. A heavy discomfort welled up in my chest. Everything in me pushed back against what I had just heard. I put my fork down, looked directly at them, and said, "What are you two talking about? Grandma deserves to be at that wedding more than anyone else." As soon as I said it, Mom shot me a look of disapproval. Her voice turned cold. "She's old and has trouble getting around. Besides, what will the guests think when they find out she's just a farmer?" That comment, full of judgment and disrespect, lit a fire in me. I was furious, but I held myself back. I didn't want to cause a scene at the dinner table. Instead, I turned to Dad, the one who had always been the backbone of the family, and said, "Dad, are you really okay with this?" He slowly put his silver fork down on the plate. He stared at the table for a few seconds, clearly choosing his words. Then, in a voice that lacked absolute conviction, he said, "Your mom's right. It's better if she doesn't come." Looking at Dad's calm face, a painful truth hit me at that moment. They had already decided. They had all agreed to leave Grandma out of the wedding. And the reason was simple, because she was a farmer, and they were ashamed of her. ashamed she might embarrass them in front of their elite guests. I couldn't accept the cruelty of what they were doing to her, so I stood up from my chair. I gently pulled Robert to his feet, picked Mia up, and the three of us walked out of the restaurant without saying another word. That night, after Mia had gone to bed, Robert and I stayed in the living room. We both had the same thought running through our minds. The wedding would go on, and Grandma wouldn't be there. After nearly an hour of silence, I finally turned to Robert and said, "Maybe we shouldn't go to the wedding." He paused for a few seconds, then answered worriedly, "I thought about that too. But if we don't show up, it'll feel like we're turning our backs on Lucas and your parents. They'll see it as betrayal." His response pulled me right back into a storm of conflicting thoughts. Inside, two emotions were tearing at each other: anger over how they treated Grandma and that lingering attachment to my family. Robert was right. They'd blow up if we didn't go. There'd be arguments, harsh words, maybe even a full-on family breakdown that couldn't be undone. After thinking for a while, I sighed and said, "But I just can't accept how they treated her. She sacrificed so much for this family." Robert held my hand and gently said, "I understand how you feel, but maybe we should still go, at least for Lucas. It's his wedding day." After weighing it all out, I told him, "All right, we'll go to the wedding, but this will be the last time we help them and the last time we attend any family event." Robert nodded, accepting that hard decision. He knew I was giving up a lot by agreeing. Even after we made that choice, I still hoped Mom, Dad, or Lucas would come around. I kept waiting for a phone call at the last minute for someone to realize how wrong they were and invite Grandma as the honored guest she deserved to be. I would drive to the airport if it meant bringing her there, but sadly, the entire week passed, and they never changed their minds. No call, no apology, and certainly no invitation for Grandma. Back then, I had no idea that attending that wedding would lead to consequences none of us could have predicted. 1 week later, on the day of Lucas's wedding, Robert, Mia, and I arrived at the venue early to help with guest reception. We got there around 2 p.m., while the staff were still putting the finishing touches on the decorations. The wedding was held at a luxurious seaside restaurant with an outdoor event space that looked out over the beautiful Austin Bay. The setting was decorated with white roses and sparkling lanterns, creating a scene that felt both romantic and upscale. Nearly 100 guests attended the wedding that day, relatives from different states, neighbors from the old neighborhood, college friends, and a large group of Lucas's fellow attorneys. I looked around and saw nothing but carefully styled hair, expensive suits, and glamorous evening gowns. As the guests settled in and the ceremony was about to begin, I searched the entire venue. But Grandma Sandra was nowhere in sight, and in that moment, a painful truth settled in my mind. They hadn't changed a thing. They had stuck to their cruel decision. Even though I was still furious with them, Robert and I did our best to stay calm so the event could go smoothly. He greeted the guests with a warm smile, and I helped organize the seating arrangements as promised. But no matter how hard I tried to stay focused, a strange uneasiness crept in. I couldn't explain exactly what I was anxious about, but that restless, unsettled feeling followed me the entire afternoon, making it nearly impossible to concentrate. While the reception was in full swing, guests laughing, holding glasses of wine, chatting about life, work, and their plans for the future, I suddenly heard a loud shout coming from the front of the wedding venue. The sound cut sharply through the soft background music and the cheerful conversations. From a distance, I heard the security guard's firm voice. "Ma'am, you're not on the guest list. You're not allowed inside." But the woman didn't back down. She shouted, her voice full of determination and just a hint of anger. "This is my grandson's wedding. I have every right to be here." That voice stopped me cold. I froze. It was a voice I had known my entire life. The same voice that used to lull me to sleep during summer visits when my parents sent me to stay with her. The same voice that once told me fairy tales about princes and princesses. The same voice that gave me honest, heartfelt advice during the most challenging times in my life. Without thinking, I put my wine glass on the table and quickly walked through the crowd of guests who were still caught up in their conversations. I headed straight for the front of the venue where the argument was still happening. Robert sensed something was wrong. He picked up Mia and rushed after me. When I got there, the sight of her hit me so hard I almost broke down. There she was, Grandma Sandra, the woman I loved more than anything. She was 76 then, her hair completely white and neatly tied back, her face lined with time, but her eyes still clear and full of strength. She had flown from Omaha, Nebraska, nearly a 3-hour flight to attend Lucas's wedding. In that moment, a thought crossed my mind. Maybe Dad, Mom, or Lucas had changed their minds. Perhaps they had secretly invited her after all. When I saw her, I grabbed her wrinkled but warm hands. I turned to the security guard and said firmly, "This is the groom's grandmother, Lucas. She has the right to be here." The guard looked flustered, clearly realizing he might have gotten into trouble, but he quickly regained his composure and responded apologetically. "I'm truly sorry. I didn't see her name on the guest list, so I stopped her. I hope the family can understand. I was just doing my job." Hearing the sincerity in his voice, Grandma turned to him with her usual gentle smile and replied softly, "It's all right, dear. I understand you were following instructions." The guard let out a quiet sigh of relief and bowed his head, thanking us for our understanding. Without wasting another second, Robert and I each took one of Grandma's arms and slowly guided her into the reception hall. Just then, I spotted my dad, Mom, and Lucas hurrying toward the front of the venue. Their faces were tense, a mix of worry and unease. Seeing how quickly they were approaching, I thought they were coming out to welcome her for a brief moment. I had no idea that the most significant family crisis we had ever faced would explode just minutes later. Right there in the middle of Lucas's wedding, not even 10 seconds later, Dad, Mom, and Lucas appeared and stood directly before Grandma and me. But their faces didn't show joy or welcome like I had hoped. Instead, they said almost nothing, just quickly pushed Grandma and me off to a corner, far from the view of the cheerful guests inside the venue. I was surprised and confused by how abruptly they acted. At the time, I assumed they had something important to tell Grandma in private, or perhaps they were planning a surprise, so I followed along without questioning them. Holding Mia in his arms, Robert looked equally puzzled, but stayed quiet and walked with us. We were led to a more secluded area, shielded by large potted plants that blocked the view from the main reception space. Once they were sure no one could see us, what my parents and brother said next hit like a bolt of lightning. Robert, Grandma, and I stood frozen, unable to believe our ears. My mother was the first to speak. Her voice was cold as she asked Grandma, "What are you doing here?" Grandma Sandra opened her mouth to respond when Lucas cut her off. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't try to be polite. He snapped at her. "You came here just to embarrass me in front of my guests, didn't you?" Then Dad jumped in, irritated. "Didn't I already tell you not to come? Why would you go and book a flight without asking anyone?" Their words came like rapid-fire accusations, full of blame and zero compassion. I was stunned, furious. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I turned to them, my voice shaking. "Wait, didn't you invite Grandma?" At that moment, all 4 of them went dead silent. No one said a word, no explanations, no excuses. That silence said everything. And then it hit me, a brutal, heartbreaking truth. None of them had invited Grandma to the wedding. She had bought the plane ticket independently and traveled more than 710 miles from Nebraska to Texas, all out of love for her grandson. She should have been met with gratitude, emotion, and maybe even shame for how they treated her. But Lucas lost all patience. Visibly annoyed, he turned to my parents and said, "Just leave her here. We need to return. The guests probably wonder where we are." Dad nodded in agreement. He turned to me coldly and ordered, "You and Robert stay here with her. Don't let her into the reception." That cruel command left us speechless, but the nightmare didn't stop there. Right before walking back inside, my mother paused. She looked Grandma straight in the eye and said the most heartless words, "Go home. You weren't invited to this wedding." That sentence, that one vicious sentence, was the spark that ignited everything, tore everything apart. It was the moment that triggered the unraveling of our family. As I stood there watching Grandma's hands tremble, I knew deep in my soul that our family would never be the same again. After they walked into the reception hall, it was just me, Robert, Mia, and Grandma left standing in that quiet corner. The air turned heartbreakingly still, with only the soft sound of music drifting from the party. I quickly found a chair nearby for Grandma to sit and rest. She looked worn out after the long flight. Then I knelt to meet her gaze and gently asked, "They didn't invite you. Why did you still come, Grandma?" She stayed silent for a few seconds, her aged eyes staring into the distance. Then, with a calm but slightly sorrowful voice, she replied, "I figured she was too busy with the wedding and forgot. I came to give her a wedding gift." After that simple answer, Grandma slowly reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a carefully kept check. She handed it to me. Printed on it was the logo of a Nebraska bank, and in clear blue ink, the amount read $200,000. Below it was her familiar signature. As I held the check in my hands, old memories flooded back like a tidal wave. I couldn't stop. I remembered the nights she stayed up caring for me and Lucas when we were sick. I remembered how she sold her last piece of land to help Lucas pay for law school. I remembered those summer mornings when she got up early to make pancakes during our visits. She spent her youth raising my dad after Grandpa passed away too soon. And she poured every bit of love she had into raising the two of us from when we were still in diapers until we were grown and building our own lives. Thinking about it, my eyes began to well up. Grandma had loved and sacrificed for us so profoundly, yet to avoid embarrassment in front of strangers, just to save face, my parents and Lucas had been willing to shut her out of the celebration like she was some insignificant outsider. After everything, I felt the harsh truth settle in. My family had become cruel and ungrateful. While I was still lost in those painful, faded memories, Robert suddenly called my name with urgency, snapping me back to the harsh reality in front of us. Looking into my eyes, he asked with concern, "What do we do now, Olivia?" After his question, I stayed silent. 1,000 thoughts were racing through my mind. I looked at Grandma, sitting quietly in her chair. Her face seemed calm, but I could see the deep sorrow behind her aged eyes. Almost a full minute passed in tense silence before I finally rose from where I was sitting. I looked into Grandma's eyes, then turned to Robert and said firmly, "We can't let this go. This family's been broken for a long time. We don't need to keep swallowing our pride anymore." At that moment, Robert could already guess what I intended to do from the look in my eyes and the tone of my voice. He asked me, worried, "If we do this, will it hurt Lucas? Will it hurt your mom and dad?" Hearing his words, I understood. He still wanted to protect my parents' and brother's image and reputation. Or at the very least, he still hoped the family could face each other on holidays or sit down together at family dinners. But for me, after what they cruelly did to Grandma today, I suddenly realized something terrifying. Someday they'd cut me out too. If I stopped being successful enough, if I no longer looked the part they wanted beside them. Without hesitating another second, I bent down, took Grandma's arm, and gently helped her to her feet. I looked her in the eye and said, "Grandma, let's go to the reception." After seeing the determination in my eyes, Robert made his own decision. He took Grandma's other arm. Mia trailed behind us, her little hand gripping the hem of my dress. And just like that, the four of us walked into the reception hall together, drawing curious and surprised looks from nearly 100 guests. That was the moment I decided I would stay silent no longer. As I walked Grandma closer to the center of the reception hall, my mother immediately noticed our presence. She looked at me with eyes full of irritation and anger, her face flushed red from the tension. She started to move toward us to stop us, but my father quickly grabbed her arm. He gave her a sharp look, a silent signal to hold back. Maybe he didn't want to cause an unnecessary scene, or perhaps he was waiting to see what we would do next before making a move. But whether they tried to stop us or not, it was already too late. Once we reached the center of the hall, reserved for the immediate families, I left Grandma with Robert and walked straight up to the MC controlling the sound system. I politely asked to borrow the microphone. The MC looked surprised, but still handed it over, probably assuming I was about to give a heartfelt toast to the bride and groom. I returned to stand beside Grandma Sandra, looking directly at my father, mother, Lucas, and his bride Claire standing at the main table. I held their gaze. At that moment, my eyes had no warmth, only deep disappointment and contempt. As the entire room fell quiet, all conversation stopped, and every guest turned their eyes toward us with curiosity. I slowly raised the microphone to my mouth and spoke in a clear, steady voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting the celebration, but I feel it's necessary to publicly speak about the cruel betrayal carried out by my family. The person who has suffered that betrayal is my grandmother, Sandra." Everyone in the room stared at us, shocked and confused. They had no idea what was going on. My mother glared at me, eyes wide with rage, her voice trembling as she hissed, "What the hell are you doing? Stop it now!" But I ignored her anger and threats. I began to speak calmly and clearly. I recounted the family dinner just a week ago at the Italian restaurant. I described how my parents and younger brother had decided not to invite Grandma to the wedding because they believed she wasn't elegant enough to be seen in front of high society guests. I explained how they said she was just a farmer and how her presence would make people uncomfortable and make our family look bad. After telling the story of that awful dinner, I moved on to what happened 15 minutes earlier outside the reception hall. I repeated their exact words, especially my mother's final heartless sentence, "Go home. You weren't invited to this wedding." As I finished telling the story, the entire reception hall erupted into murmurs and shocked whispers. Some guests shook their heads in disappointment. Others leaned in, whispering to each other in disbelief. Lucas reacted instantly, his voice rising in a panicked, furious scream. "She's lying about me. She's just jealous because she couldn't marry someone as smart and beautiful as my wife. So she made all of this up." My mother jumped right behind him, seizing the moment to strike back. Her voice rang out sharp and shrill. "That's right. Olivia is jealous of Lucas's success, so she's trying to ruin the wedding with these lies." Hearing their shameless accusations, I gave a calm, slight smile, then responded with steady confidence. "There's a security camera right outside the reception hall. We can check the footage. The security guard who was out there could confirm what had happened. If necessary, we can pull up the footage right now and find out exactly who's lying." When I said that, my parents and Lucas's faces went pale. They knew the camera would show everything. No spin, no excuses before they had a chance to twist the narrative or make a run for it. I looked them directly in the eyes and asked loud and clear, "So, do you dare watch the security footage with me?" Lucas immediately froze. He started to stammer, his voice cracking with panic. "Why, you're setting me up. This isn't how we should handle this." His refusal to check the footage said it all. Everyone in that room understood then and there that I had spoken the truth. After I finished telling the truth, and after Lucas's desperate attempt to dodge the security footage, the guests at the reception started whispering among themselves louder and more animated than before. I caught snippets of their comments. "I can't believe Lucas could be that cruel to his grandmother. She's an elderly woman. His grandmother, for God's sake. How could they send her away like that?" Hearing the crowd react exactly how I hoped, I decided it was time to play my final card. I raised the microphone and spoke loudly, my voice full of emotion. "Today, my grandmother traveled over 750 miles from Nebraska to be here, not for the food or attention, but to give Lucas a special wedding gift, a check for $200,000. The entire hall exploded. Gasps and shocked exclamations filled the air. I pulled the check from my coat pocket and held it high for everyone to see. I slowly walked around the nearby tables, ensuring the guests could read $200,000 printed in blue ink. As I passed Lucas, my mom, and my dad, I deliberately stopped, holding the check just long enough for them to see it up close. Lucas's eyes lit up with greedy excitement. He instinctively reached out, trying to grab the check, but I pulled it back just in time. A few guests couldn't hold back their reactions. "Oh my God, $200,000. That's a massive gift. She really loves her grandson." The shock over such a generous gesture was written on every face in the room. Watching it all unfold, I knew without a doubt. My parents and Lucas were burning with regret. They had just thrown away something priceless, all because of their arrogance and shallow pride. I was ready to bring everything to a close, but what Grandma did next, none of us could have seen coming. Her actions pushed our family's tragedy to its breaking point. As I stood there holding the check in my hand, Grandma suddenly shouted in a commanding voice, "Olivia, give me the check." Her words struck like thunder, powerful and absolute. I froze in place, unable to move. The entire reception hall fell silent. The chatter and whispers vanished, replaced by an eerie stillness. Sensing his last chance to salvage the situation, Lucas rushed toward Grandma. His voice trembled with pleading and what sounded like remorse. "Grandma, I was wrong. I'm sorry for not inviting you to the wedding. I was just so overwhelmed with all the planning. Please don't be upset with me." Hearing Lucas's apology, sweet and seemingly sincere, I suddenly feared that Grandma might soften, smile kindly, and hand over the check as she originally intended. My hands began to tremble as I slowly returned the check to her. Once the check was firmly in Grandma's grasp, Lucas stepped closer, both hands outstretched respectfully, ready to receive the generous gift. But then Grandma looked him straight in the eyes, her gaze ice cold. She spoke calmly, but with steel in her voice. I'm not angry with you, Lucas, because you're not my grandson. I have only one grandchild, and her name is Olivia. Gasps filled the room. Then, without hesitation, Grandma raised the check above her head in front of the stunned guests. And right there, cool and collected, she tore the $200,000 check into tiny pieces. The fragments fluttered to the floor like snow. My parents and Lucas lunged forward, trying to stop her, but it was too late. The check lay in shreds across the cold tile. No one said a word. The room was frozen in disbelief. I stood speechless, stunned by her decisive act. Before I could even begin to recover from the shock, Grandma turned to me with a soft smile and said, "Let's go home, sweetheart." Moments later, I walked out of that reception hall. Robert was carrying Mia, and Grandma Sandra was beside me, our heads held high, proud, unapologetic. That was the moment my family's tragedy reached its peak. After leaving the reception, amid the stunned silence of everyone there, I drove Grandma back to our small rented apartment. During the 20-minute drive, she sat quietly in the passenger seat, gazing out the window with an expression of calm that amazed me. What surprised me most was how completely composed she seemed. There wasn't the slightest regret or sadness about the bold stand she had taken back at the wedding. I even caught a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Once we entered our small living room, Robert went to the kitchen to pour Grandma a glass of water. Mia, with her wide, curious eyes, ran straight into her great-grandmother's arms, laughing joyfully. Even though they had only met a few times during brief visits, she recognized her immediately and clung to her like they'd never been apart. Grandma hugged Mia tight, kissed her on the cheek, and whispered, "My beautiful little girl." Mia beamed and started telling her about her new dolls and what had happened at preschool. In that warm, cozy room, for a moment, the world outside didn't exist. As we sat down, unsure of how to begin processing the storm that had just hit our family, Grandma did something that left me speechless. She slowly pulled another check from her coat pocket. I looked closely and realized it was brand new. A second check, written for the same amount as before, $200,000. She stood up, walked over to me, and gently placed the check in my hands. With a warm, affectionate tone, she said, "Lucas had his share, so you should have yours. This is for you." Holding the weight of that check in my hands, I hesitated. I looked up at her and asked, "But you tore up the check meant for Lucas. Doesn't this seem unfair to him? After all, he's still your grandson." Grandma let out a hearty, unapologetic laugh. Then she said with conviction, "Lucas destroyed his gift when he disrespected me and sent me away. But you earned this. You stood up for me today. And just so you know, much bigger gifts are coming for your family because you're the only ones who stood by me when it mattered." Something deeper in her words sparked curiosity in me, especially about the bigger gifts she mentioned. But I chose not to ask. Robert and I had never been the kind of people who sat around waiting for handouts. We constantly reminded each other that this life is ours to build with our own hands and through our own effort. Grandma stayed with us for about 3 hours, enough time to rest and share a simple dinner, before Robert and I drove her to Austin Airport for her return flight to Nebraska. We had asked her several times to stay a few extra days to relax and talk, but she kindly refused. Her round-trip ticket had been booked in advance, and she wanted to stick to her plan, so we respected her choice. As I hugged her one last time at the airport gate, I knew deep down that this day had changed everything about our family forever. Around 10 p.m., just as we had put Mia to bed and were finally settling down after a chaotic day, my parents and Lucas showed up in the lobby of our apartment building. They stood at the front desk, visibly angry and irritated. They demanded that the front desk staff allow them to go to our unit on the 12th floor. Their voices grew louder and more aggressive each time they were denied, but the receptionist, a young guy named Thomas, stood firm. I had already instructed him not to let anyone from my family upstairs without explicit permission. As their shouting escalated, disturbing other residents, Thomas had no choice but to step in. He warned them he would call the police if they didn't leave the premises. Realizing things could spiral quickly, they finally backed off and left the building. But it didn't stop there. Soon after, they began calling me nonstop. The phone rang repeatedly in our small apartment, but I refused to answer. I didn't want anything to do with them after what had happened. After dozens of unanswered calls, they started leaving angry voicemails. The first one was from my father, blaming me. "You deliberately ruined your brother's wedding. You will take full responsibility and pay back every cent for the disaster you caused." Lucas's message was even more threatening. "You're the one who secretly called Grandma and invited her to sabotage my wedding, weren't you? I'll never forgive you. Just wait." Then came a bitter message from my mother. "Are you proud of yourself? You've disgraced this entire family." Listening to their messages, each one full of blame and threats, I felt something strange. Not anger, not sadness, just amusement. Their twisted sense of logic was almost laughable. They couldn't see that their cruelty had brought this on themselves. After hearing all the messages, I calmly blocked each of their numbers. I couldn't forgive what they had done to Grandma, the woman who had given everything for this family. More importantly, I didn't want my daughter growing up in a toxic environment, exposed to people who treated others with such disrespect and coldness. Cutting ties with blood relatives is never an easy decision, but when those ties become poisonous, when they start to harm the people you love, it becomes a necessary step to protect your own family, and that's what I chose to do that night. Once I felt certain our lives wouldn't be disrupted by them any further, I decided to call David, a distant cousin I'd always stayed close with. David had also been at Lucas's wedding and had witnessed everything from start to finish. When I asked what happened after we left the reception, David gave me a detailed account of the aftermath. Right after we walked out of the hall, Claire, the bride, a successful lawyer known for her strong personality, could no longer hold back her emotions. She walked straight up to Lucas, who was still standing in shock among the guests, and slapped him hard across the face in front of everyone. The sound echoed through the silence in the room. Claire then took off her sparkling diamond wedding ring and threw it onto the floor without saying a word. It was clear that this marriage had ended before it even began. The guests, too, could not overlook the behavior of my parents and Lucas. Many stood up and publicly condemned the way they had treated Grandma. Some of Lucas's business partners even announced on the spot that they were cutting ties. Longtime friends walked away in disappointment, making it clear they no longer wished to be associated with him. "What struck me most," David said, "was the reaction from some of our relatives, especially those who deeply respected Grandma Sandra. They couldn't hold back. Right there in the reception hall, they shouted at my parents, calling them ungrateful and cruel. Several family members swore they would never attend another event where my parents or Lucas were present." In the end, the reception closed in coldness and tension. Most of the guests left early, their faces etched with disapproval. Listening to David recount all of it, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I might. No sense of revenge, no justice-fueled relief. Instead, I just felt sadness for all of them. Yes, they had been cruel. Yes, they had brought this upon themselves. But they were still my family, and watching them lose everything because of their arrogance wasn't gratifying. It was heartbreaking. Later that night, after Mia had fallen fast asleep in her room, I told Robert everything David had shared with me. He listened quietly without interrupting. When I finished, he didn't say a word. He just let out a long, heavy sigh. Maybe he felt the same weight I did, the helpless sadness that comes when a family falls apart in a way you can't fix. 1 month after the explosive events at the wedding, life seemed to settle back into a quiet rhythm. No one spoke of Lucas's failed wedding anymore. The gossip and scandal surrounding our family gradually faded. My parents and I were no longer in contact. We had become strangers. I truly believed it was all behind us, and that life would continue in a new direction for our small family of 3. We were still living in our cramped rental apartment, still paying monthly rent. But at least we had peace, until one Saturday afternoon in October 2023. Something changed everything. I was sitting in the living room with Mia watching TV when the doorbell suddenly rang. I opened the door, and there she was, Grandma Sandra. She hadn't called, no text, no warning. She was just there, standing at our door with a small suitcase and a gentle smile. I quickly stepped aside to let her in. Mia ran into her arms with a joyful squeal when she saw her great-grandmother. Grandma laughed softly, stroking Mia's hair, as if the surprise visit were the most natural thing in the world. We all sat in the tiny living room, still caught off guard. Once again, Grandma left us speechless with what she had done next. She slowly reached into her brown leather bag and pulled out a folder of official-looking documents stamped in red. As I leaned in to look closer, I realized they were a property deed. It listed a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs of Austin with a large backyard and a 2-car garage. She handed the folder to me and said gently, "This is a gift I want to give your family." I held the deed in my hands, stunned, my fingers trembling. This house was easily worth over $500,000. I immediately shook my head and tried to hand it back. I told her firmly, I can't accept something this big. I appreciate your love more than anything, but this is too much. But Grandma looked at me with unwavering resolve and said, You will accept it because you deserve it. I took a moment to think. Then I looked her in the eye and gave her one condition. I'll only accept it if you agree to live with us. We want to take care of you in the years ahead. Grandma smiled and nodded without hesitation. I'd love nothing more than to live near you and my great-granddaughter, she said. Just 1 week after that unexpected visit, Grandma officially moved into our new home with us. That marked the beginning of an entirely new chapter for our little family. 2 years have passed since the day my family's tragedy unfolded at Lucas's wedding. Our lives today have completely transformed for the better. Every morning, I wake up in our warm, 4-bedroom home, and I feel deeply grateful for the life we now have. Grandma Sandra, now 78, is still healthy and cheerful. She's always the first one up, preparing breakfast for the family and watering the plants in our little garden. Mia, now 8, is incredibly close to her great-grandmother and spends weekends learning how to bake with her. Robert and I feel that life has never been more full or meaningful. We can care for the person who means the most to us and raise our daughter in a home overflowing with love and respect. As for my parents and Lucas, from what I've heard through mutual friends, things haven't gone so well. After divorcing Claire, Lucas faced a steep decline in his career. Many clients backed out after what happened at the wedding, and his reputation in the legal field took a significant hit. He's now living alone in a small apartment, isolated and regretful. My parents aren't doing much better. Long-standing social ties have faded, and they've become increasingly isolated from their community. They still ask about me occasionally, but pride keeps them from reaching out directly. Whenever I share my story with people, some tell me they believe Grandma Sandra was the one who caused our family's downfall. They say if she hadn't shown up at the wedding unannounced, none of it would have happened, and our family wouldn't have fallen apart in such a painful way. They think she put me in a difficult position, forcing me to choose between her and the rest of the family. But I see things differently. I believe Grandma didn't cause the tragedy. She revealed it. Her presence was just the spark that exposed what had been simmering beneath the surface for years. The lack of respect, the pride, the ingratitude, those traits had always been there. Looking back now, I realize that sometimes life gives you defining moments where you either stand by quietly or choose to speak up, no matter the consequences. That day at the wedding was one of those moments. If I had stayed silent, Grandma would have been humiliated in secret, her love dismissed as worthless. But by speaking the truth out loud, by choosing her side, I finally saw who my parents and brother truly were and who they had always been. Do I regret what I did? Not for a second. Because today, when I see Mia laughing in the kitchen with her great-grandmother, when I watch Robert happily helping Grandma plant flowers in the yard, when I hear the sound of love echoing through this house we now share, I know we made the right choice. For all the pain of losing my parents and brother, we gained something far greater, a home built on loyalty, gratitude, and love. So what about you? Do you believe my grandmother was the one who caused my family to break apart? Or do you see it like I do, that this was simply the inevitable result of flaws that had long been ignored? I genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Leave your opinions in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others who might need to hear it. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I'll see you in the following story.